it used to be thought that the majority of Nazis were sociopaths.
Yeah.
But it's not the case.
Right. Millions and millions and millions of Germans who...
In fact, the majority of them were not.
Yeah.
Only a very small percentage, just like within our population.
Right. So were they engaging in abusive behavior? Clearly.
They were.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, it's not like they were outright sociopaths.
Exactly.
Oof. Popping.
It's a good sound.
Good sound. It is a good sound. I want to drink from the can today, buddy.
I am.
Yeah.
I gotta wash my cup.
Oh, I see.
All the methylene blue.
Methylene blue. Well, happy Easter Sunday. Happy Resurrection Sunday now.
Happy Sunday.
Yeah, we just revealed when we were recording this episode.
We did.
I don't know if that's means anything, but yeah. Well, in Easter fashion, well, I don't know if it has anything to do with our conversation today. Has anything to do with Easter?
I don't know,
but it's.
What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, it's a question that comes up overtly, and what's the opposite of overtly?
Indirectly.
Yeah. Indirectly and overtly comes up with people I talk to, people we both see in therapy, have seen in the past rather. How do you differentiate between abuse and conflict? Like, are we just having conflict, or has this graduated into abuse? Or am I just not being considered in this situation? Is this person maybe not even intending to abuse me, but it's like ignorance, out of ignorance? Have you seen that?
There's a lot of good questions there.
Have you seen that? Well, I guess before we even tackle the question, like, have you seen that manifest for people?
Do you mean like in couples work?
Or just specifically, individuals? Yeah, let's talk about couples, because we could dive into
Well, so I mean, I think
other things.
I think that both individuals and couples report feeling neglected or as though they're being treated unfairly. And so part of the reason I think that many people come to therapy initially sometimes is to try to differentiate the two. Right. Or they feel as though they've been abused and they want it to stop, though they don't know the steps to take to really facilitate that process. Because I think in some cases, there's actually a larger question of pain surrounding many types of, and I'm speaking like when abuse is clear and when it's obvious. In those cases, I think many times people find themselves in a state of trying to understand where and how this all happened and how they got to this place.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, the processing that takes place is often one in which it's like, how did I even get here? And I think it's a valid question, because I think sometimes what happens is that with the partners that we have, we end up in somehow being a co-conspirator to a process that we didn't desire.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say co-conspirator, I mean that there were certain things in me that allowed this process to take place in a way that I didn't intend for. But because I didn't understand what existed there, I couldn't also prevent it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking about the individual themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I'm laying a lot of broad groundwork pieces here, but I guess to come back to your initial question, do they do they ask things like that, or does that come up? Well, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
right. Yeah,
yeah,
all the time. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think, and to be completely transparent, it's like, I think even in conversations, even with my own wife, like, we'll find ourselves clarifying all the time. And I think, like, as people, we do this. It's like, so wait, what are you saying exactly? Because we're trying to make sure that, okay, like, I'm not interpreting you how I think you intend on me interpreting you, or help me understand what it is you said there. Because if it's one way, then I'm going to be upset. If it's another,
Mm.
then okay, I can work with you here. And sometimes it's not the way that, we would desire, but I think that the clarification of those different pieces happens in even stable relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I would
Yeah.
I would say that especially in stable relationships, because that's how they become stable,
Mm.
is that they clarify intention and restate desire,
Mm.
and are able to navigate the different pieces and forms of those things
Mm. Mm.
clearly.
Yeah. Yeah, you introduced a lot there.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I'm just like it's more of like I don't even know what direction I want to go because I'm like so many good
There's a
thoughts.
plethora.
Yeah,
Take it.
plethora,
Take your
plethora.
pick.
So you said earlier that it's abuse is one of those things, at least from what a lot of people say, is that you it's hard to notice and to understand until you're kind of too far deep.
Yeah. It's quicksand.
Yeah, it's like a frog boiling
Yeah.
in water.
Yeah.
Um and and again, like when people come in to the session to therapy, they're like trying to trace their steps back and figure out like, dude, what was I was just seeing this as conflict.
Mm.
I was just seeing this as disagreement.
Mm.
Or I was just seeing this as whatever it was, and then in retrospect, I'm now defining it and understanding it to be
Mm.
abuse,
Mm.
right? Now the question and what's is where is that line? Where does it is there a line, and when does it cross into abuse, right?
Mm.
Because at every point in a relationship, one can say, yeah, we disagreed. Yeah, we had conflict. Right. And I think you and I both come from the school of like conflict in and of itself is not
It's not the problem.
it's not a problem. It's
Yeah.
not to be avoided.
Yeah.
Like conflict is good.
It's necessary.
It's necessary, especially when you realize conflict is often what allows you to conflict leads to connection.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say that when conflict can have resolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and sometimes like it takes it longer for there to be resolution, but in most cases, it's like the body getting a fever.
Mm.
It has to heat up in order to get things better.
Mm.
And I would say that in relationships, sometimes it's the same way. Things have to heat up a little bit for things to feel better.
Mm.
Now, things can get too hot and too hot to handle, and we don't want that. That's bad.
Mm.
That kills your heart, literally.
Yeah.
And metaphorically.
It's yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Burn scars.
Yeah. But I would say overall conflict is like a fever.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
It's necessary for things to heat up to a point.
Yeah.
And it's good.
Right.
But if they get too hot, that's not going to be productive or helpful.
Yeah. And that's why we always talk about like rules of engagement in conflict.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we can have this heated discussion, but let's say, okay, for some people, it's like, we're not going to yell. For some people, they're good yelling, right? For some others, it's like, dude, if we yell, then it's too hot.
Yeah.
Or we call each other certain names, or we, again, or like there's vitriol and contempt.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it de-escalates.
Yeah.
It gets too hot.
Yeah.
But I think when you have rules of engagement, conflict in many ways is healthy.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about something too that often is necessary there, though, right? And that's a mutual respect. right? So to some
Yeah.
level of mutual respect has to at least be there in order for me to want to comply, or a
Mm-hmm.
respect for the idea or the institution of what it is that we're fighting for,
Mm-hmm.
in order for me to want to comply with the idea of these rules of engagement.
Yes.
And sometimes I think what happens is that those things are gone long before. And so then the effort to try to do anything about them
Mm-hmm.
is just greatly diminished.
Yes. Yes. And I do see that with couples when they come in and there is that lack of mutual respect, or in other words, what John Gottman would call contempt,
Mm-hmm.
where you're looking at each other and you're just like completely dismissing the other person's um, perspective, completely like you have decided that this person can't change,
Mm-hmm.
and the way they are is just the way they are in the most negative sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at that point that couples will usually come, and even as a therapist, you're like, guys, it's hard for me to work with this
Mm-hmm.
because none of you are willing to budge.
Yeah.
Now, it's at that point where some individuals will say, some might even say, I feel abused.
Yeah.
They might not be calling it that, but the way they're labeling things, it's like, okay, are you saying this person is abusing you?
Yeah. So I think because abuse is a serious thing, you have to be very careful and serious with how you use that language. Because in those cases, right, let's say somebody has been capitulating with what's happening, right? And there's a certain level of awareness with it, right? Then I think what happens there is that it's more or I would say that it's a larger question of, okay, who am I in this relationship?
Mm,
And what is that dynamic that I have co-created in this relationship to allow things and to facilitate this process as well? Now, I would say when abuse does get really severe, there's a question of, or rather, one individual is not taking any bit of ownership at all
or accountability.
or accountability. And then it causes indirectly the other to take on too much accountability. And so then there's this process of, okay, well, what can I do? I feel like I'm doing everything I can. And they become so frazzled that then things start to deteriorate and they stop being able to function well. And then that other individual who's not taking accountability was like, well, see, there you go.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very
Mm-hmm.
convenient problem to have.
Mm. So would you say that's when it's kind of like slipping into abusive
Yeah.
behavior?
Well, that is abusive
That is
behavior.
abusive
Yeah,
behavior.
that's
Okay.
abusive behavior.
To be
Like,
clear, yeah.
well, so, and I think this is a really, I think abusive behavior can happen at any point in which we are not self-aware of our own issues, to be frank.
Mm.
Right. Because in this context, I have abused my wife, metaphorically speaking. Right. No, I've never physically abused her or anything of that nature. But I am sure that there's been moments in which I should have taken and I know there has, actually, speaking of this. And if she were here, she could remind me of some of those.
Yeah.
But there's been moments in which I was not taking ownership or accountability for something that I should have, and I knew it.
Mm.
And I made an accusation towards her in some way.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that was wrong.
Right.
And if she were not a very strong person, she would have perhaps then devolved. And arguably, it's not to say, oh, well, if only these people were stronger, right? People who suffer abuse. It's like, if you were just a little bit stronger, you'd be fine. No, that's not what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
However, it brings up the point that any person is capable of doing this. if they
Okay.
are not aware of themselves enough
Of
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 abuse.
abuse. Okay, that's
Yes.
important because I
Yes.
feel like we live in a world where when you bring out the word abuse, it's almost saying there are types of people in this world who abuse. And these are people who have that character trait, they have this personality disorder. And
Yeah.
so if everyone is capable of abuse, that's kind of changing it, because when we say like, oh, this person abused this other person, it's like, oh man, this person, they need to be we need to distance ourselves from this individual. We need to lock them up. We need to put them on a certain list, right? And
Yeah.
I think there's obviously a place for that.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I certainly don't want to say that there's no such thing as sociopaths.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say there's no such thing as narcissistic personality disorder, though I think it is grossly overused.
Yeah.
Only because statistically speaking, that probability is much lower when we're talking about a real clinical definition. And I'm curious to know, let's just really quick do a little search here because I don't actually have it off the top of my head.
Of what?
Prevalence of narcissistic. Why don't you type
Oh,
it?
like like the rate?
The rate of narcissistic like diagnosable narcissistic personality disorder. I believe it's like 0.05
Yeah.
or
Okay.
less.
Hey, ChatGPT, what is the rate of narcissistic personality disorder in terms of like the population? Is that what
Yes,
we're asking?
in the United States. Let's
In
just
the
look at
United
that.
States. Okay. I love ChatGPT. I always talk to ChatGPT.
I don't know how to use it, so that's helpful.
Oh. Okay, so here it says 1% of the
Okay.
general population.
So 1%. I was 0.5%
Some
off.
studies go a bit higher, up to 6, but those often include broader definitions or subclinical traits. So
Yeah,
that's probably
we're not subclinical is not helpful, in my opinion, because if we're talking about subclinical, then we're talking about bad people, and that's not very specific.
Yeah. So 1%.
1%.
0.5 to 1%.
Okay, so I wasn't actually that off. I said
Yeah.
0.5 initially.
Yes. Yes.
So if we're looking about 1%, and there's how many people in the United States? Was
almost 400 million now.
okay, so 400 million.
Yeah.
So 1% of 400 million.
So
me
it's
do
40. 10% is 40 million. So
yeah,
4
so
million. 4
so
million.
4 million roughly.
Yeah.
Okay, so 4 million, and then scattered across, let's say the 52 states. So even if we were even being generous, you'd say, okay, 10 million per state, right? And then if in each state populace, like, so stay out of your big cities, you'll be safe. No, I'm just kidding. Right. Okay. So there's some ability and affinity there, but it's certainly much less than I think how much we often utilize or attribute it to. However, it's still there. So I don't want to dismiss that. I don't want to diminish that. But I will say that I think that, circling back to that, I think a very important thing to ask is, okay, what type of boundaries do I have for myself as an individual and as a person? And how do I engage within relationships initially to begin with, so that I can be protective of myself and be proactive myself? Because I think more often than not, unfortunately, the way that we inherently teach people to be, like, let's say children at grade school, I would say most often we teach all children, be nice, be kind, do what other people ask you to do, right? In many ways, like, it's a pro-social behavior to teach kids just to be nice to each other always. And when that happens, if one kid is really, really good at that, it's likely he may suffer quite a bit. Right? In the sense that, okay, like, because if he's nice to everyone and does anything anyone asks him to do all the time, that means that someone is likely going to take advantage of that. Because they will tell themselves, oh, well, he wanted to. Okay, he's fine with it. Right? And so now very quickly, if all of a sudden, say individual A, and let's say child grows up to an adult and is, a grown adult and is kind to everyone all the time, it's likely they will run into someone who is going to abuse or take advantage of that kindness.
Mm. Yeah, it's true. And it's true. If people do take advantage of it, whether because what we're talking about largely is intention, right?
Yeah.
I think in many situations we can be put in a scenario where it's easier than other situations to take advantage and abuse someone. Like, so they've done these like experiments. Like there was the experiment they did on they put people in a lab. I'm forgetting the exact one, but essentially they put individuals in a lab and like they connected an electric shock to like a victim.
Yeah.
And you had to like
and they thought they were
and so like basically somebody is instructing you, so
to turn it up.
You have to just turn up the electric shock and on this person and see how much pain they are in, and you're supposed to listen to the instructions you're given no matter what. And basically they said that there were points where these people, the person in this chair was like screaming and be like, please stop, just please stop, I'm in pain, like I feel like I'm gonna die. And they just turn it up and turn it up just because somebody in authority over them
told them to. Yeah.
It's like something like you otherwise maybe in another situation you wouldn't do.
Well, yeah. So I think that's I'm trying to remember the name of those experiments.
Yeah.
This is these are famous.
Yeah, so they actually
because they use that also to describe what happened with Auschwitz.
Exactly. I was just about to say that. Yeah. With the Nazis in Germany.
Yeah, because it used to be thought that the majority of Nazis were sociopaths. Yeah. But it's not the case.
Right. Millions and millions and millions of Germans who,
in fact, the majority of them were not.
Yeah.
Only a very small percentage, just like within our population.
Right. So were they engaging in abusive behavior? Clearly.
They were,
obviously. Yeah. But a lot of them, it's not like they were outright sociopaths.
Exactly. And so that you bring up an interesting question, because I think that is a question that comes up a lot, I think, in the rooms of asking, and whenever someone brings up something to say, I feel like I'm being abused, and then I think it's always really relevant to ask the question of, well, do you believe that they intentionally want to harm you? And I mean it seriously. Like, do they want to see you in pain? Like, what is it like and what is it that they truly desire here? Is it power and control for power and control's sake? Right? Are there elements here to where that is truly what they're vying for in every area of their life, to a dysfunctional level, right? Or is it that, okay, there's a different intention going on here and you are being harmed? Still, that doesn't make it right.
Right. There's a difference between intention and impact.
Exactly.
You can still be harmed.
Yeah. And I think of, I guess, a classic case, and perhaps this isn't so classic, but I'm going to use it because it's one applicable to me. Excuse me. And that's like, okay, right now I'm the only one that works in my home. My wife wanted to stay home with our children. And when she was pregnant with our last child, right, there was a lot of challenges that arose there, right? Simply because it's a very challenging time. She has 3 kids. That she has to parent the majority of the day.
Yes.
While she's pregnant with another, right? And they're all very young. She's still nursing. And so it's like high stress, high challenge, right? And then after that, right? So after delivery, she still has a newborn, right? And 3 little kids. Now, if I've worked all day and then I'm tired and I come home and I'm like, hey, I'm really tired. Do you mind if I take a nap? Right?
Yeah.
Now,
I'm just imagining the reaction
Right,
from
exactly.
that question.
We don't have to imagine very far.
Yeah.
But full disclosure, as ashamed as I am to admit it, I've said that. And saying it now, it's like, what the hell are you thinking? Why did you let those words come out of your mouth?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
this is something in which, okay, no, I'm not intending to abuse my wife. But if I am not aware of what's happening, if she was to go to her therapist and tell her, I feel like, what on earth? I'm trapped. It should be fair to say that.
Yeah.
But the intention there, right, and the desire is very different.
Oh, yes.
Right. And so I think that's a very relevant, and it's just a point example to bring up, right? Because I think it's very palpable and very common.
Oh,
actually.
very common. Yeah, and that's where I think there's a lot of that, and couples usually will not recognize it until over time the person who, let's say your wife, for example, let's say you that was a pattern of yours.
Sure.
And it's not like, again, you're just tired from a long day at work. And let's say your wife was like, I see my husband is tired. He does a lot for the family to bring home the dough,
the bacon,
right? So let him get his nap. But over time, if she was to recognize how much it weighed on her, that maybe you weren't helping in the ways that she didn't realize she wanted your help, right? And that happens a lot with couples. It's like, man, why do I feel like salty all of a sudden? Why do I feel resentful?
Yeah. So
right?
I think one of the things that leads to this in many cases is people pleasing. Right. So,
and that's a good one, because some people are like, am I just people pleasing, or am I being abused, or am I doing both?
Yeah, because both can totally happen.
Yeah.
Right. But I think when transparent, now one advantage I would say that we have going for us is that we're very transparent. We've had a lot of history together to be very transparent with each other, and we can be very frank with each other. And so there's a lot of security in that, so that there isn't as high of a need to people please. Right. Which it to some degree might feel nice every once in a while. Oh man, they just want to please. But actually, I would argue that with your spouse, it's way more dangerous.
To people please.
Yes, way more dangerous. Because you actually need your spouse to know how you actually feel. Right. You need that, because you need, especially the person that you are in the trenches with, to know, hey, I'm in the trenches.
Yeah. Right.
And that's really important.
It's very important. And I will ask couples this, is like, okay, you're people pleasing, which in many ways you're complying, because if you really shared what you really think about this thing instead of people pleasing, then we know that maybe you don't really want to accept this, so you're complying. Now let me ask you, does your partner want you to simply comply? And most of them will be like, well, no. I'm like, well, then why are you complying?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of times it usually has to do with it. At some point in time, there was a really negative experience when they didn't comply.
Exactly.
And so there was a lot of positive, or rather, we could say
negative reinforcement. Yeah.
Yeah. Towards that specific action, which facilitated, okay, no, it's good for me to comply. And arguably within workplaces, that's a very, very effective behavior within the workplace. Right.
Yeah, you spoke up, and now you're.
Yeah. And if you comply, if you do exactly what the boss wants, when the boss wants it, and even more so.
Yeah.
Anyone asks you to do anything ever, you are a yes man or woman. You will be showered with praise. You always do anything. Even when I didn't ask, it was totally fine. And you will make all the sacrifices for everyone, so they don't have to make any of them. Wow. How do you do it?
Such a high performer.
Such a high performer. You die a little inside. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Now, I want to be careful here too, because there's some people that really it I don't want to mistake this for, or rather, excuse me, I don't want to displace the notion of doing acts of service for people.
Oh yeah.
Right? Or to dismiss this idea to say that there isn't something fulfilling and gratifying about being able to serve other people.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The way I view it, because I consider myself a recovering people pleaser.
Nice.
Is in many ways the way I've learned to do it is oftentimes when I people please, I am serving in order to be loved and receive love versus service from a place of love. It's a very different mindset.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, just again, I think people pleasing in many ways is me trying to control others' opinions of me by serving them. It's purely self-centered. It's like, if I please you in this way, if I make you happy in this way, even though you're going to be benefited from it, my real motive is to feel good about myself. Yeah. And so it's in many ways it's a form of control. Versus I don't need it doesn't if I give you this, whether you're happy or not, I'm serving you out of the principle of service because I love to serve. And I don't necessarily, it's nice if you're happy with me, but it's not predicated on you being happy with me.
Yeah. It's like the value you have from your work. Talked about that a couple episodes ago. Yeah. Like why you do what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's hugely functional. And I think it's really relevant too, that like if we were to look at, I'm going to change gears here a little bit, like types of abuse. So I'm not going to dismiss emotional abuse, which is most often in the forms of emotional manipulation, right?
And that's probably one of the hardest to define. Emotional abuse is harder to define than like physical, sexual.
Well, I think because it's very complex, right? Like and often implies or implicates a certain, I would say lying, to be frank, right? Or rather, like, because manipulation is essentially a form of lying. Right, we are trying to change outcomes indirectly and not being honest about what we're doing and why.
Yeah,
and I would say that generally speaking, that is going to be practiced more often. And it's not to say all the time, but I would say that it is going to be practiced more often by women. Men
manipulation.
Yes, more only because. The statistical probability for women to be physical abusers is lower. Men are going to be more prone to physical abuse.
Right.
By nature and emotional. So you could argue that men are more predominantly going to be more abusive in general.
Yeah.
Because they could be both physically and emotionally abusive.
Yeah.
Right. However, it is worth noting though that more predominantly, just because they don't have that corner of the world on physicality as much as men do.
Right. Versus men will be like, I don't need to be as conniving. I'm gonna just straight up
I'm gonna slap
blame you, gaslight you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. And I think that's the only reason to make that distinction. But when it comes to that and with that, I think it's really relevant to understand, okay, for ourselves, all right, when we engage or when we find ourselves in a scenario that's unfavorable, I think it's worth asking the question of how did I get here? What parts in me exist here that contribute to this type of action? Not to self-deprecate, only to understand how it is we operate within the sphere that we are in. Right? Because in many cases, like with areas of abuse, it's not uncommon for people that are in abusive relationships to go from one to the next and the next.
Very common.
Extremely common. So at some point, it's extremely necessary, or for instance, and the most common you'd see is like, okay, men are going to say they're in an emotionally abusive relationship. They're going to find a woman that is emotionally manipulative in one way. Then they're going to go to the next one. They're going to go to the next one, right? And they're going to blame it all on them. The only problem is that's just not true. Yes, they could have been all with emotionally abusive women. However, if you've been with 3 different women who are emotionally abusive, there is a you problem happening.
Yeah.
And as terrible as it sounds, if I've been with 3 different men that are physically abusive, there's a me problem going on.
Yes.
Right? That I need to be able to identify.
Yes. And it's important to, because people we have this struggle of holding this duality that we're not saying that person should not have been.
No.
Should
not at all.
That person should have been abusive. Like,
not at all. It's not justifying.
Nothing justifies their behavior, right? But it's in order to help you. Simply acknowledging that they abuse you is not necessarily going to help you get the agency to change that pattern, right?
Yes.
And that's where it's about taking that personal agency and responsibility to get out of that pattern.
Yeah. Well, and that's what it is. You just brought up that word, pattern.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead. What are you saying?
Well, I think that there's a really important thing to bring up there, in that relationships are constant patterns, right? And arguably, it's a pattern that exists, and it will exist in that same pattern until both parties decide to change something about how that pattern exists.
Even one person can change a pattern.
You're absolutely right. However, I would say that if you want to change that pattern functionally, and if you want a relationship to stay together, both parties need to change the pattern.
Yeah,
together.
It's like a dance.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have to change the dance.
Exactly.
The salsa is not salsa.
Yeah, the salsa.
We gotta move to
we need the 2-step
waltz or something. Yeah, the 2-step. We gotta move. We gotta. One person switching it's not gonna change the dance.
Yeah, there's a saying in recovery: wherever you go, there you are. And I think in relationships, it's very much the same way, right? Wherever you go, there you are. And I think that one of the most, frankly, like one of the most functional things that my wife and I learned to do was have conflict and go toe to toe with each other without one bowing or regressing, and then the other becoming more hyper aggressive, right? Because sometimes that's what happens, is that if one individual doesn't know how to stand up for themselves appropriately, the other becomes resentful of that, and then will just go on the attack. Right?
They become resentful that you're bowing?
Yes. 100%. Because they want you to be able to stand. They don't understand what's going on.
So they
I would say this is probably
by further stomping you on the ground?
I would say this is probably more predominant with women to men, right? Like you hear men say, well, all my wife does is nag.
Yeah.
She just nags. Right? It's like, okay. Well, how are we rising to that? Are we either becoming completely
compliant,
or are we becoming completely overtly aggressive? Because those two extremes are likely not going to function. I need to be able to stand toe to toe with it and understand, all right, what part do I need to take on, and can I? And what part am I not willing to? And that's where it stays. And I think that's what's oftentimes misunderstood as far as that specific type of behavior. But going back to that dance part, I think understanding the dance that you're in is hugely important.
Oh yeah, it's super important. Going back to this idea of patterns, right? So yeah, going back to this idea of patterns. So when we're determining, so domestic violence, like in our partner, intimate partner violence, in couples counseling, there's 2 kinds of violence that we assess for. It's what we call characterological violence and situational violence. So situational violence is like, a couple just they got physical in an argument. Maybe they were intoxicated and fists were hurling, right? Or we pushed each other, broke a glass. But it's not necessarily a one-time thing. It could happen several times. Now, that is very similar in characterological violence. The difference is in a situational violence, there's often a sense of regret, accountability, um, some sort of ownership, some sort of revisiting. Like, man, like what was that? Like,
Wait, tell. Okay, so let's explain that again. So you're saying like in situational violence where there was like alcohol involved or something like that?
it doesn't have to be alcohol.
Okay,
Just
okay.
any kind of
like a situationship.
No. It couldn't be a marriage.
Okay.
It could be a marriage.
Or sorry. No, I used that word inappropriately. That's not what I meant.
Yeah.
So can you explain that again? So in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
are you saying then like we have a blow up happen for whatever reason, both parties get angry and throw stuff.
Yeah, they get physical.
Okay. And this
So, or they could be emotionally, like yelling, cursing at each other or whatever, right? So they could do that. Now, in the characterological violence, that also happens. The difference between the two is not that those things didn't happen. The difference is that, so in characterological violence, it is what you were talking about asserting that dominance, power, and control with very little lack of ownership. So very little ownership. So complete lack of ownership, lack of accountability. However, in situational violence, it's like, dude, we're stuck in this pattern, but we don't like it. I regret it. I don't like that I do this, but I do it.
I would argue that in those cases, that's actually where substances are involved more frequently.
For sure. Yeah. And so characterological violence is where we're like, dude, okay, that's abuse straight up, right? Like that is like, we need to, like, I would, like, typically you wouldn't even counsel characterological violence. You'd be like, dude, you need to find a place to be safe and distance, or like, let's figure out how to stop this from happening if one partner's not taking accountability. Mm-hmm. Versus situational, like we still work with couples. Work with couples like that frequently, and you would call that abuse as well, right? Because of the harm that's is received. Because it's not always that they're both violent. There could be one person who's always the one instigating and doing the abuse, but it's still this like, man, like I don't like that this is happening. I want to change this.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because one thing that you do see a lot with, the character type, I think, is that there is a request, usually on the abuser, to please just don't make me angry. Please just don't get me that mad.
Yeah. You're responsible for making me mad.
It's indirectly then pinning it on the other person. Like, you just really need to let me get my sleep, or you really need to let me, like, it's, you need to not piss me off. Mm-hmm. Right? Because if I get mad, like, now all of a sudden, I'm still not taking ownership, actually, for me.
Yeah, you're not. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm pinning it back on you. And that's, I would argue that's why that term referring to character is even called characterological. Because it's a character defect.
It's a character defect, lack of accountability. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's, to me, I feel like that's like the number one trait in like abusive characterological behavior. It's just that lack of accountability, lack of ownership. And then obviously the effects of that is the other person tends to, like you said, take so much of the blame, lose a sense of independence, sense of self, agency, sense of self, sense of agency, often isolated from others, especially others who would call that out.
Depersonalization.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And it's important to note too that those types of feelings can happen within stable situations, though it's not as common, and typically when it is brought up, it is addressed very differently by the perpetrator, if you will,
Yeah.
or rather the individual who is inflicting those, either directly or indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I mean by this is to say, like, if I'm working 5 days a week and I'm not aware of how my wife is experiencing life and how the day was, I'm likely to assume she's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's very common for me to operate on the notion no news is good news. Now, it would be good for me to check in with her, right? It would be good for me to ask her, "Hey, how are you doing?" Like,
Yeah.
and to take interest.
Mm-hmm.
That's a kind thing to do. It's a good thing to do, right? But it's perfectly plausible that maybe I don't. Maybe I don't ask how she's doing, and I just assume that, well, she didn't tell me, or maybe I don't even think, right? It's like, and that's where the common phrase, "That's your problem, you don't think," like, right? So, but I think many people, that's a very common thing that happens with individuals, is that, like, okay, well, and this is where we get back to the intention part, right? Usually in those cases, like, once the individual who's, because arguably in that scenario, let's say I'm working, I don't ask her how things are going really bad, right? She needs a break.
She's burnt out.
If she asks me, oh, I'm gonna drop whatever I have to try to acquiesce to that and make sure that happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then also try to make sure, hey, how do we maintain a good rhythm here that's going to be functional?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And again, the challenge is oftentimes the ask comes kind of late.
Yes.
And sometimes your anger gives you the courage.
Yes.
To ask. Mm-hmm. And so then it often comes out as criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, dude, where is this coming from? Like, mm-hmm. What? Like, what it, mm-hmm. Like, I didn't mean to, like, I wish I knew about mm-hmm. this. And then it can easily become a cycle of
devolve into.
And
so that's where I think at both parties, it's really helpful and functional for if, and I would say the people pleaser is usually the one that gets stuck with this, in the sense that, like, and then if you're both people pleasers, then good luck. You're just done. No, I'm just kidding. No, but in the sense that it's really important for the moment that you start noticing that impulse to just acquiesce, to try to be able to communicate, hey, look, I'm happy to do this. I do need this, though. Right. And many people would ask the question, and it's a fair question. Well, how is it that simple? Right. Or how could it be that simple? And I think sometimes people oftentimes haven't actually sat down to ask themselves, what do you want? They're not used to answering that question.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be a simple question.
Yeah.
Would you like to go out right now or stay with the kids? Like, what would you like to do? Not whatever I would like to do. What would you like to do? What do you need? Right. And so I think that's it. That's something, yeah, I have to compliment my wife on. She knows what she needs. And so it makes my life a lot.
She'll share it.
Yeah, she'll share it. And in most cases, I don't have to worry about that being.
Yeah, she'll bring it up. Yeah, my wife too. She'll like, oh, no, I don't have to. Yeah, she'll bring it up.
I will say, like, mm-hmm. where we've had conflicts before is that there's definitely been scenarios in which I would have liked her to bring it up a lot sooner, and so that's where I have to make the ask, like, hey, I hear you right now, mm-hmm. but I need to know this way before, because where it's at now, this level of intensity, mm-hmm. that's not sustainable. It's not going to fly.
Right.
And so that's the impetus now on me. Like, mm-hmm. I need to make sure that that's known.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, that's good. So, like, it's the impetus is on you to be asking. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If I don't like how that's coming across.
Oh, okay. You need to bring that up.
I need to bring that up too.
I see what you're saying.
If I don't like how the point to which she's getting before she brings it to my attention.
Yeah.
I need to bring that up too.
Totally.
To where it's like, hey, I'm happy to meet these requests.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know how we can get here a lot sooner.
Mm.
right, than where we're at now. And usually that involves a conversation around, well, it's really just a routine and schedule that I need you to be intentional about either asking me how I'm doing, in which case, okay, that's the emphasis back on me to say, all right, yeah, I need to be more intentional to ask,
Mm.
right? Or I need you to do X, Y, and Z, right? As far as making these parts of my sphere more accessible to me,
Mm-hmm.
which is like, okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think all of those have to do with the dance that we're playing within our relationship.
Yeah.
And I, yeah, dance is never simple. But
Yeah,
I think that the longer that you dance with someone, the better you get.
it's true. Practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then intentionality
Yeah.
is important. No, that's good. That's good. I think that way we prevent ourselves from falling into those harmful patterns, right? That again, from an intention perspective, both partners are not intending to harm each other in that way, and that's often where I love to do work with couples in that sense, where it's like, guys, let's assume positive intent, but still acknowledge the harm.
Mm-hmm.
Like both of those things can exist,
Mm-hmm.
right? And let's move forward from there. And that's where like there's a lot of progress can be made.
Yeah.
Um. So one of the things that I found interesting is there was this story of a lady from a certain culture who, in that culture, the women would be like beaten by their husbands, or
Like on a Tuesday, it's like
yeah, yeah,
beat your wife day.
yeah, or like just like physical, like if they're angry at you, just you know,
Slap them once.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And sorry if this is, I don't know if you should have like informed the audience, but yeah, so this is in some cultures around the world, this is normal, like especially
It's normalized.
it's normalized,
Sure.
even if you're just a woman in the house, like if you're a daughter or sister, like you just be in for something, not doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And it's something that was like so normalized in the sense of like they wouldn't even call it abuse. It's just like, this is how it is. It's not nice, but this is how it is. And so this woman came to the US and she was on Oprah, and she met other women who had been physically abused by men. And it is only when she learned how they were defining it as abuse that she began to experience the PTSD effects of that abuse. Only when she learned from other people. Isn't that interesting?
It's fast. Well,
Yeah.
it's very much, we've brought this notion up before. It's like the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, because that's very interesting, because and it's another thing we in school that we were taught is, if you find for example, like a woman from another culture where it's normalized, like let's say like someone who's an immigrant who's just moved to the States, this woman doesn't have a job, she doesn't work, maybe the husband works, and she has her kids, she has like maybe 4 kids, and she's being physically abused by a child, but to her it's like,
You mean by her husband?
sorry, but
Yeah.
sorry, yeah, she's being physically abused by her husband, but to her maybe she's saying that like, what I'm getting out of this relationship is worth more than the abuse, if that makes sense. Like my kids, the amount, the money for the home, like the connection to the wider extended family, because that's huge with some of these Eastern cultures. It's like, for you to tell me like, oh, you need to get into a safe place, you need to distance yourself from your husband, we can put you in a shelter, we can, for many people in that scenario, they're like, dude, what I'm getting out of this is worth more than the abuse, as bad as the abuse is. Right. And oftentimes that's why many people stay in abusive relationships.
Yeah.
It's the same way you stay in a job that's crappy.
Mhm.
It's like your boss is mean, but for you, quitting is not an option. Like, I need to pay
Exactly.
the bills. I need to feed my family despite all this unethical behavior at this job. And in that scenario, what do you do? Because I do think maybe a lot of us, either maybe it's not ourselves, but could be ourselves, but we find other people in similar scenarios where you're like, dude, this person is like, what's happening here is not okay. But you can't simply be like, listen, you need to get to safety right away.
Mhm.
Because again, you can lead the horse to the water, but the horse is the only person who can choose
Well,
to drink.
and so I think the cultural component is really important to bring up because in I would be curious to know, and I haven't looked up the statistics on this, but I would imagine that in the cultures where it's normalized, you still have outliers to where there's a certain level of abuse that is not normalized. They obviously don't kill their wives,
Very, yeah, that's
right?
true.
They
That's true.
obviously don't incapacitate their wives to where they can't function,
Hmm.
right? That there's a level there to where it's like,
Yeah.
okay. Now, certainly I would say that there is there absolutely can be things that exist within cultures that are not healthy, right? So we
Hmm.
brought up you mentioned once within Kenyan culture, it's like I think how what was it you had said? It was well, and other cultures as well, but to have like a wife and somebody on the side is perhaps
Oh
more
yeah, yeah.
common.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Many African cultures,
Yeah.
like
Yes.
it's you can have it because a wife in many African cultures, a wife is made for childbearing,
Mhm.
not for romance.
Mm.
So if you want romance, you can
Mhm.
go get a side chick.
That's just how it is,
Yeah.
right? Now, arguably, I would imagine that there's still a level to where it's like, okay, there's still some form of level of commitment to the family, to the notion of family,
Hmm.
to where if somebody was acting with outside of this social norm or construct, that there would be a certain view taken upon that,
Hmm.
right? To where if like, oh well, if they were spending all their time with their side chick and none with their like
Right, because it's often like this. There's the level of discretion, and because I
exactly.
mean, often you'll talk to these women, and also, by the way, I'm not. As we're talking about these culture things, I personally do not condone any of this. Like, I also don't
Yeah, no, it's
condone
not.
the husbands beating their women, and like that's I don't. But there, oftentimes, women will say like, "I know he has a side chick.
Yeah.
As long as he's committed to the family, he's here with the kids on certain days. We go to church together. We go do our things together. He can do whatever he wants. As long as he has his commitments, he can do whatever he wants. And none of our friends know about it. He can be with whatever child chicks he wants. Not bring a STD home, whatever.
Mm,
And they've just come to accept it.
mm. Yeah. So that's and this is where I think there's a certain amount of I think within any culture or system, there's a certain amount of normalizing that will take place or could take place around anything,
Hmm.
right? Now, I still think though there's an underpinning of, well, do we think this is ideal
Right.
or not?
Right.
Right. So like if you were to even ask most individuals in that culture, if well,
Is
do
this
you
the
think
ideal?
is this the ideal? Like, is this perfect this way? Or would it be perfect if he just slept with his wife and that was it? Would that be ideal? What if that was how it was?
Yeah.
I would say that most people would still say, well, yeah, I mean, that would probably be more ideal, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like
Preferred.
preferred, like if what I mean, just think of it roles of efficiency. If one person could check all the boxes, that's way more efficient than having five, right?
Right.
I remember hearing the saying when I was in Zambia, you have one wife and five problems, right? Like, and it was in reference to how men that just had so many different partners, right?
uh,
But it's I guess to say that though, or to circle back to that, I think that in cases to where there is abuse, right? and more specifically to where it becomes even to a physical component to this, I would say even within those cultures, it's like, okay, yeah, would it be ideal that you have to strike your wife for her to understand something? Is that ideal?
Mm.
Or would it be preferred that you not have to do that at all?
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
presumably, right, you're angry.
And so you could go as far as like, would that be it for kids too? Strike your kids. Would that be ideal?
Yeah, would it be ideal,
Deal?
or could it be
Oh,
preferred that, like,
yeah.
hey, what if you didn't have to? And there
Mm-hmm.
was still a level of adherence. So I think if we're thinking about maximum efficiency, right?
Mm.
And so I think to a certain point, there's still a level there that's, and obviously, I think, admittedly, this is from a Judeo-Christian perspective, because I think that morality, there's an underpinning of a certain level of morality in human beings that's written in our souls.
Yeah. Universal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because of that, I think that transcends many things. So, but I'm curious, like, so with you, with what you were bringing up, like you were talking about, okay, so these people that are in these experiences, and then, okay, like, was the question then, like, what do you do in those circumstances to where, okay, yeah, they have their needs met, but they would still prefer to have this over not having it, or not having anything.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And in those examples, I would suggest it's not so much telling them to like leave immediately or to get out, not emphasizing that. But emphasizing, and so like with the example of the woman who left her culture and came to the States, I think sometimes it takes exposure to awaken your senses to what you're experiencing and what you're missing out on. Right? So it's hard to be what you can't see. It's hard to imagine a future if you haven't seen it. It's kind of similar to what we said in the last podcast about what C.S. Lewis said of like the boy who is satisfied with making mud pies in the
never
slum.
Even seen the ocean.
Yeah. But once he sees the ocean, he's like, dude, why am I so satisfied with this mud here? And I think in many ways, helping people to see what could be, like, man, look at this marriage. Look at this example. Look what they're doing. It's like, is this, because like you said, in some cultures, in some families, in some relationships, certain behaviors have become so normalized that we don't even know there's a different option. There's a different possibility that can be attained. And so, and I think sometimes what coming to therapy, talking to people, being involved in other communities allows you to see that. And that's why with abuse, why isolation is so important for abusers is because you don't get to see the alternative when you're isolated. That's all you know.
You can't miss what you don't know.
Right. Exactly. So, I think people being exposed to different options of better can awaken their senses to like, you know what? Yes, there's something I'm gaining from the situation that might be worth staying in this abuse. But if I see what's better out there, maybe I can open my eyes to figure out how I can still have what I value without the abuse.
Well, I think it's an interesting. There's 2 points that come to mind. One is that, like, when people typically come to therapy, like, this is a different scenario. Like, so typically I would say that if people come to therapy, it's because they want to solve a problem, usually, of some sense. Maybe they want to try to solve it just by being able to talk, right? Or to express. But there is an issue of some kind that they want to solve, right? Or something on their heart that they want to be able to wade through. In these scenarios, though, I would say that typically if people have questions along these lines, they want an alternative already, or they're wondering if that's out there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't seek it.
Yeah. Especially therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. Because therapy is like the last place you like. It's, I'm going to stay
the last
away
resort
from
for many people.
I'm going to stay away from that, because then I'm admitting and saying that there's a problem here. But I think that the other interesting thing that I think is worth noting and also saying is that in some cases, I think it's worth noting that not all, and this is going back to what we were saying before, not all perceived abuse is abuse in the true sense of the word, right? In the sense that it's not driven by intention.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very relevant thing to say, because I would say the trap for many millennials, like kids growing up, is to say, well, my parents abused me. Right.
Right.
And for the vast majority of them, it's not true in the true sense of the word. Now, perhaps some of them didn't have a life that was quite as luxurious as the previous kid or something else. But in that sense, comparison can be the thief of joy. It's not to say they never experienced a type of abuse. I don't want to disavow that, right? It's not to say that, right? Because likely at some point they did. However, it is to say that, all right, it is worth understanding the intention and how this actually looked and what I desire now in the current scenario and how I want that to take place and what I'm going to do to facilitate that process.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good place to end it, is just like understanding that difference is important. That again, like situational versus characterological, like the intention behind it.
Intention's key.
Intention is so key. So cool.
That one went fast.
Yeah, okay. It did. Yeah,
it did. Until next time.
Until next time.